What a great time to start recording. Hopefully you all heard that. Good, filtering settings have been changed. I hope everybody's good. So I started with the shofar to do a very simple thing, which was play the three major notes of the shofar. The first one, and for anyone who possibly has never heard a shofar, to give everyone the opportunity to hear it. So the first note I played is called Tikiyah, right? Simple, straight note. Shavarim is the second note, the da-da, da-da, da-da. And Trua is the last note that I did. Da, 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 da. So it's a 9. So they're broken down into little parts of 3. And so on. All right. So with that, we're gonna go backward a little bit. Now that you've heard the shofar, let's talk a little bit about what the shofar is about and what it is for. So with that, I'm gonna share a screen with you. Everything you ever wanted to know about the shofar? Okay, not really. What is a shofar and why do we sound it? So there are 3 references in the Torah to the shofar, specifically, explicitly. We're going to look at 2 of them very quickly, and then I'll tell you about the third. I just didn't want to bog us down in too much information. So the first reference in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, to the shofar is Vayihi bayom hashlishi, b'chiyot haboker vayihi kolot uvarakim va'anan kaved al hahar v'kol shofar chazak me'od v'yecherad laha'am asher b'machaneh. Now it was on the 3rd day, when it was daybreak, there were thunder sounds and lightning, a heavy cloud on the mountain, and an exceedingly strong shofar sound. And all of the people that were in the camp trembled. Now, if you know a little bit about this, you probably recognize the scene. This is the moment at which God gives the 10 commandments to Moses and all the people of Israel. And what's interesting about this, there's lots of interesting things about this. 1 is we get a shofar here. 2, nobody's blowing it, right? It's the sound of a shofar that's occurring at the mountain. So that's very interesting. Additionally, and a nice other thing to note here, we are told that the shofar sound is being played. We are not explicitly told what a shofar is. And so we have to intuit or assume or have derived down from the generations that what the shofar is what this is, which is a ram's horn, right? The horn of a ram or some other animal, ... We'll talk about that a little bit later. One could ask whether it is not just the horn of any animal, also something we will talk about later. All right. There is another mention of shofar, and that is a little bit more explicit for us. U'b'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad l'chodesh mikra kodesh yihye lachem kol melachet avodah lo ta'asu yom trua yihye lachem. In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall observe a sacred occasion. You shall not work at all your occupations. You shall observe it as a day when the horn is sounded. Now, 2 important things. 1, this is the shofar that we sound for Rosh Hashanah. Very interesting. The second important thing, the word is that the word Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the new year, is not used here. What we get is on the 1st of the month of Tishrei, which is the day that Rosh Hashanah happens to fall, although Rosh Hashanah is not what it's called here. What it is called here is Yom Truah, the day of when the horn is sound, which is kind of a funny name. The third thing that's interesting about this is the word shofar is not used here, right? In fact, I am currently learning with a class the entire tractate of Talmud Rosh Hashanah, and we're actually at this point right now on page 33 of the tractate of the Talmud. And page 33 teaches us that you are not actually learning, you're not actually doing, so truah is the name of the thing that we're doing. It's the name of the note being blown, and the day is called Yom Truah. But what we're doing here is we're also doing the day of the blowing, right? So it's the day of the blowing, and it's also called the day of the shofar. The word shofar does not appear in this verse at all. And what that means is that we are kind of going to have to draw together the fact that the shofar appears elsewhere in the Torah. It's actually mentioned as a thing that we blow in the same month, the month of Tishrei, on the 10th of the month. And why do we blow it on the 10th of the month? The reason we blow it on the 10th of the month is to release all debts, right? It is actually, we learn in the Torah in another place in Leviticus that we are, and you can Google this if you want, that we are blowing the shofar on the 10th of Tishrei, which is Yom Kippur, in order to release people from debts, which is fascinating because we don't actually specifically learn that the word shofar is attributed with Rosh Hashanah. Okay. But anyways, the rabbis in the Talmud on page 33 of Rosh Hashanah teach us that because you blow a shofar on the 10th of Tishrei to release debts, so too you also blow a shofar on the 1st of Tishrei in order to fulfill the obligation of Yom Truah, the day of blowing. All right, that's interesting. So now we know that we blow it. We don't really know why we blow it, and we don't know this next question, which is really important. What animal can it be from? So in our Mishnah, the Mishnah is a rabbinic book that came a little bit later. The Mishnah says the following: Kol hashofarot kasherot chutz mishel par'ah, mipnei shehu keren. Amar Rabbi Yossi, v'halo kol hashofarot nikra'in keren, shene'amar bimshoch b'keren hayovel. The Mishnah begins to discuss the primary mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, sounding the shofar. All shofars are fit for blowing except the horn of a cow, because it is a horn and not a shofar. So the rabbis in the Talmud have now derived a difference between a shofar and a horn. A shofar is the horn of any animal except a cow, which is really interesting. And any, by the way, bovine. So for instance, if you go to Southeast Asia and you grab a water buffalo horn, it is to be considered a keren. A keren is, as you would know if you go out into the wilds of whatever state you live in or country, is a bovine horn. And those are typically kind of straight, right? They don't go all curvy schmurvy like this beautiful shofar that I have. And so, in general, they are not permitted. Now, there is a lenient opinion in the legal codes that says, in exigent circumstances, if all you got is a cow horn, blow, baby, blow, you're good to go. You're fine, right? That you can fulfill with. But ideally, the three most popular animals to blow a shofar, to make a shofar out of, are a ram's horn. That could be any kind of ram or sheep of the male variety that makes a nice long twisty horn. An ibex, which is a kind of ram, but a desert ram that's found in Israel. They make beautiful horns. We'll talk about it in a second. And the third one is a kudu, right? The kudu horn is an African animal. And if you've ever seen the really long shofarot, those are almost all from a kudu. Now, you can get a long horn from a ram, but typically a ram's horn twists more and gets really scrunchy. The long horns come from an ibex. Okay, that's a little bit about the animals. Can it be unkosher is a good question. If a shofar has a hole in it or a big crack in it, there is a way to repair it, but if it's not properly repaired, it is unkosher. Additionally, in the old days, they used to plate shofars either at the mouth or at the top. You can actually still see these sometimes in synagogue, gift shops, or in fancy places. There'll be a metal, silver, or gold plating over one part of the shofar or the other. And the answer is that generally, if you plate the shofar in such a way that it changes the timbre, vibration, and sound, it is no longer kosher to be blown on Rosh Hashanah. Okay? How do you buy one? Well, the simplest way is you could go to any slaughterhouse that deals in rams and collect a leftover ram's horn, and then you would boil it. Then you would drill holes in it to clear it out. The boiling makes it so that the inner cartilage will actually just slide right out. You could drill a hole in it, and you have to drill holes properly. Then you would heat it in sand in order to make it malleable to twist it in certain ways. And then you have a shofar. Now, easier than the DIY make it yourself is to go someplace and to buy it. So any Judaica shop or on the internet, you can buy one. The shofarot come in a variety of expenses. The cheapest are the smallest and thinnest, and typically they're unmodified in the mouthpiece. Once you heat it in sand, you can, using a pair of tongs, you can twist the mouthpiece so that it will make a nice mouthpiece size. If you can see this pretty well, maybe I should stop share so you can see it better. I will. If you can see this one really well, you see this one has been formed into a nice round shape, and that makes it my shofar, and I really like using it. If you don't go to a fancy place, they won't twist and change it. You'll just get basically a long rectangle-y thing, and you got to get your whole mouth onto it, and you got to buzz your lips in just the right way, or it won't blow. You don't just blow a shofar, because if you blow a shofar, you get this sound, which is nothing, right? Shofars are like other horns, brass instruments, where you buzz with the lips. Roughly, when I blow my mouth for a shofar, it looks like this. And that's how you blow a shofar. All of you who are in junior band in elementary and middle school know this, right? And so when I buzz my lips like that, roughly, I get this sound. Now, you've heard there was a high sound and then a low sound. Depending on your umbrature, the way you hold your jaw and your lips, you can get several sounds out of a shofar. I get 3 if I'm lucky. Most really talented musicians can get 4, 5, or even 6 different sounds. All right, back to sharing screen. Because I can tell you about the mechanics of it all day long, but you may be asking yourself, so what, Rabbi? What's interesting about this shofar? Like, what spiritually does this do for me? Okay. So you heard the sound that it made it, and at the beginning of the class, for those of you who came late, I made the 3 notes that a shofar makes. The first note that we do for a shofar is called Tikiyah, and it goes like this. And then there's the next note, which is the Shavarim, which makes 3 notes, same length of time as the Tikiyah. And then the last one is called a Teruah, and it's 9 notes in a staccato beat, same length as the Tikiyah and the Shavarim. And that's all you need to know about what a shofar sounds like. All right. Now, here's the important part. What is the spiritual meaning of the shofar, right? Any individual can blow this horn and can honestly do it almost any day. In fact, during the month of Elul, in your standard American synagogue, in the morning, if there is morning prayer, they will blow the shofar at the end of services. This is to serve 2 purposes. 1, the month of Elul is holy as we prepare for the high holidays. 2, and this is really my sinking suspicion about what it's really about, the shofar blower needs practice, right? And so for the entire month of Elul, shofar blowers like myself get an opportunity to blow the shofar. All right, so what does this mean? All right, so I'm going to give you 5 interpretations about what the shofar means. That should take us to about 12:45, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. I know the answer to some of these questions. I don't necessarily know all the answers to all the questions. I'll do my best, though. So this is from the Talmud, from page 27, which I was just referencing, although a different spot of the page than I was talking about. Hatokeh letoch habor, o letoch hadut, o letoch hapitas, im kol shofar shama yatsa, ve'im kol havara shama lo yetze. If one sounds a shofar into a pit, or into a cistern, or into a large jug, a pitas, if they clearly heard the sound of the shofar, they have fulfilled their obligation. But if they heard the sound of an echo, they have not fulfilled their obligation. The Talmud continues, Afal pisha zeh shama v'zeh shama, zeh kiven libo v'zeh lo kiven libo. Even though this one heard, and also the other one heard, nevertheless, this one focused their heart to fulfill the obligation, and therefore has indeed fulfilled it. But the other one did not focus their heart, and so they have not fulfilled their obligation. You need to hear the shofar itself, and not an echo of a shofar, or a sound that you think was the shofar, but you weren't really focusing anyways, and you weren't entirely present. To quote a famous Buddhist thinker, Ram Dass, who actually also happened to be a Jewish kid, I forget his given name, but it was something like Michael Friedman. Ram Dass, one of his great teachings was, be here now. Be here now. And the Talmud is really all about this, being here now, right? If you blow a shofar, and you're not really listening for the sound of a shofar, but rather you're there to hear the echo of a shofar, or you think you heard a shofar, but there was also a donkey next door and it might have been that, or somebody hit the horn on their Toyota Corolla in the parking lot, they may have not fulfilled the obligation of shofar because you weren't really focused on the shofar. You were focused on something else, or you were listening and you were like, maybe it's actually the horn. So anyhow, that's a little bit about the intent and the focus. Additionally, one might ask, why would someone stand in a cistern or blow a shofar into a cistern? And the answer is the same reason that your rabbis and cantors in synagogues today use a microphone, which is it's going to give a big booming, echoey sound. And so blowing a shofar is you know, if you have a big audience, you're going to want it amplified. The question is, can an amplified shofar fulfill the mitzvah? And the answer is, not so sure, right? Because if you're playing a shofar into a microphone, I have here in our synagogue in Pittsburgh, right? We have a whole soundboard, and we can change the treble, and we can change the bass, and if you have a really fancy soundboard, you can change about 12 other things about the shofar, right? What's to stop me, Rabbi Goodman, very techno, hipster, modern rabbi, from plugging my shofar into a wah-wah pedal and going all Peter Frampton on the shofar, right? Wah, 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 right? Peter Frampton, anybody? Nod if you understand. No. Okay. Anyways, some people caught that reference. Other people are totally confused as to what the rabbi is talking about. We do not want an adulterated, modified, auto-tuned sound out of our shofar. We want the real thing and nothing but the real thing. And we also want to know that we're hearing the true sound, right? So that also requires us to be present for the sound, to be listening, to be aware, to be there, right? And so whenever in the past I have been listening to shofar rather than blowing, I'm getting ready as the blessings are being made by telling myself, be present, be here, listen to the shofar. It's a very spiritually intense thing to do, which is to say, I need to hear this, and I need to hear it as present as I possibly can. One last thing is that during the pandemic high holidays, we didn't go to services in person, right? We went on Zoom. And so one of the things that I thought was important for my congregation was I blew the shofar during services, and I blew it over Zoom so that people could hear it. And I was alone in a room with me and the president of the synagogue, right? But we also offered a drive-through service for anybody who wanted to. And I stood at the parking lot of the synagogue and just blew shofar for anyone who wanted to drive by. Why did I do that? Because I was concerned that I'm not entirely sure that shofar on Zoom fulfills the obligation. And I wanted people to be present for the actual shofar if they wanted to be. All right. That's reason one. Be present. Reason two, wake up. So the Talmud also, the Mishnah Torah, which is a document by Maimonides, who was one of the foremost scholars of Judaism, lived from 1135 to 1205. He wrote a voluminous law code he referred to as the Mishnah Torah. And in the laws of tshuva, and the laws of repentance, he wrote the following about the purpose of the shofar. Even though the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a biblical decree, it has an intimation, right? There's a remez, there's a hint, there's a secret meaning to why we blow the shofar. As if to say, arise from your slumber, you who are asleep. Wake up from your deep sleep, you who are fast asleep. Search your deeds and return. Remember your Creator. Maimonides is saying two things here. Right? The first thing he says is the shofar is a biblical decree, meaning it doesn't really matter what the spiritual meaning is of the shofar because it's prescribed in the Torah. It's a mitzvah, and therefore you should do it because it's a mitzvah. But even though it's a mitzvah, it has a deeper meaning. The deeper spiritual meaning of shofar is not necessarily what was above, which is that you need to be present, but slightly differently than that, it's wake up, right? Hitoreri, klomar uri yeshenim. Wake up, you sleepers, right? And I think this is very deep and very meaningful. We have a 365-day year in which at some moments in our life we are very present, right? When our football team scores a touchdown to go ahead, as this past weekend may have taught us if you are a throw ball fan, or those moments where you're really like listening to your partner, your spouse, your friend, and you're hearing their words and you're like, I know you're really struggling and I understand you and I'm with you and what can I do to make it better, right? And then there's other times in our life where we're kind of like, to quote one of the great authors of the last era, half asleep in frog pajamas. That's a Tim Robbins book. We are half asleep in frog pajamas. We are just not there, right? We're not present. And that's normal, right? You can't be operating at 100% of awareness 100% of the time. Sometimes you're just not fully there, right? You're eating dinner and you're scrolling through your phone and you're not like totally dialed in to the world around you, right? You just can't be 100% all of the time. We're not capable of it. But the message that Rambam is bringing about the shofar is it's time to be present right here, right now. Rosh Hashanah is a wake-up moment. It is a be-present moment. So you can't be asleep for it, right? You can't be scrolling through your phone or looking at your watch and thinking to yourself, where else am I supposed to be? I've got a meeting later. I've got an email to send, right? I've got other things to do. Rosh Hashanah is the moment at which not only do you have to be awake for that moment, but it asks us as human beings, what are the moments of our life that we are present for? And what are the moments of our life that we are not present for? And if we are not present for certain moments in our life, was that a good decision, right? I think deeply what Rambam is saying here is the shofar calls us to ask questions about how awake we were in the past year and how awake we're going to be in the coming year. And which moments of our life are we sleeping through that we should be present for, okay? I think that's a big piece. So number one, be present. Number two, wake up, okay? And both of those are kind of different sides of the same coin, if you will, right? The person who is constantly awake never needs to worry about being present. But the person who is not present currently needs to be woken up. So here we go. All right. Got a nice comment that I took out of an English book. And this is one of my favorite rabbis and teachers, Rabbi Art Green, who's a teacher at Hebrew College in Boston, and a translator and commentator on Hasidic works. His work was very influential in getting me to write my own Hasidic commentary book, which is called Life Lessons from Recently Dead Rabbis. It is not yet out, but I hope soon, shortly after the holidays, this book will come out. Life Lessons from Recently Dead Rabbis. You can Google it. It'll show up on the publisher's website. Self-promotion over. Okay. So in Art Green's commentary to a wonderful book that I recommend called The Jewish Holidays by Michael Strassfeld, he writes the following. Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, the Shelah, an important moralistic work of the 17th century, takes special note of the fact that each series of shofar blasts begins and ends with a Tikiyah, a whole note, surrounding a shavarim or a teruah, a broken note. This is the theme of Rosh Hashanah, he writes. We were whole, we became broken, but we shall be whole again. We were whole, broken, even shattered into the fragments of the teruah, but we shall yet be whole again. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are the high holidays of Judaism, and they talk to us about the mistakes that we've made and the way that we as human beings can progress beyond them, how we get right after we screw up, right? In Judaism, we don't believe the same as Christianity. Christianity believes in a principle called original sin, that you all walk around flawed and imperfect all day long. And that's why you pray and try and do God's will, because you're trying to atone for the original sin. In Judaism, we don't believe in that concept. We believe that at Rosh Hashanah, we apologize, and at Yom Kippur, we are cleansed. But in between Yom Kippur and the next Rosh Hashanah, we proceed to do what humans do, which is give in to our lower instincts and make mistakes, right? We screw up. That is the nature of being human. We fail to fulfill all of the positive commandments that we should have. We don't give as much tzedakah as we could. We don't show up at synagogue as much as we could. We don't go to the hospital to visit those who are sick as much as we could. We miss positive commandment opportunities. We miss negative commandment opportunities all the time. We violate the Sabbath. We wrong our neighbor by unpolite speech. We defraud people in business by, taking a little bit more here and there than we should have, right? We mistreat our friends, our neighbors, our spouses, our loved ones. We speak ill of other human beings. We're all broken. We all screw up, right? That's the nature of being human. That's the nature of being Jewish. And the High Holidays reminds us that it is the time when we become whole again. So every series of notes that we play when we blow the shofar begins with a Tikiyah, then plays either a Shavarim or a Truah, or a Shavarim Truah, and then ends with a Tikiyah. The Tikiyah is, Shavarim is, and Truah is. So 2 of those notes are broken, and those are the notes we play in the middle. So what this means, the Shela, the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, is telling us that's intentional. The notes in the middle are broken because the middle of our lives, the middle time between Rosh Hashanah and the next Rosh Hashanah, we are broken. We make mistakes. We screw up, and we need to get right? And sometimes also emotionally we are broken. When we fall out with a friend, with a loved one, with a relative, we have a bit of brokenness to our soul. And so these High Holidays are an opportunity to do Tikiyah, to become whole notes in between the brokenness once again. All right, so that's interpretation number 3. Interpretation number 4, we've only got, I think, 2 more? Yes. The 5th one is my favorite, so I'm going to make sure I have time for it, but I think we'll be okay. Number 4, which is a riff off of the previous one from one of my Hasidic rabbis that I really very much like, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak of Berditchev, the Kedushat Levi. And the Kedushat Levi writes the following: Tikiyah is the language of the word love. For in the beginning comes the love from the Holy One, blessed be God, at the hands of the people Israel, as Israel serves God in truth and in love. And when they serve with truth, God smashes Shevarim, their teruah, their inclination to do evil. We smash our desire to laziness and complacency and harshness. Afterwards, God adds love to the people Israel, and this is the Tikiyah at the end. So this is a riff on the previous idea. It's very similar, but different, because it's playing with the same idea of the notes of the shofar, right? The Tikiyah is a whole note. The Shevarim and the Truah are broken notes, and the Tikiyah, again, is a whole note. And what Kedushat Levi brings is that the word Tikiyah is part of the language of the word ahava, of love. Now, there are lots of reasons as to why he may have said this. My take on why he said this is the Tikiyah is the opening note. It's the first note. It's really the call to shofar, right? It's the alert note that begins every set of the shofar blast. And it also is the alert note that ends it, right? For those of you who listen to the radio or TV, once in a while you'll hear, the following is a test of the emergency broadcast system. And then the radio plays this really obnoxious sound. And then there's a bunch of beeps. And then there's another beep right at the end. That's the alert system of Tikiyah, right? The Tikiyah is the open note before the information is transmitted, and then the end note. So that word, that Tikiyah, is the word of love from God, right? God is sending a sound down to us that says, hey, I love you, okay? And you should serve me in truth and in love, okay? When we do that, God will shavarim, break, that's the Hebrew word shavar, means to break, the teruah, the inclination to do evil. Now, this is a play on, is a pun on the word teruah. Teruah in the Bible, as we read at the beginning of class, literally just means it's the sound of the bleat of the shofar. It's just the sound of, it's the sound that it makes. It makes a teruah. But if you broke the word down, it would be also understood as teruah, that which is the doing of evil, from the root word ra, right? You are ra, you are evil, you are bad. So when it says Tikiyah Shavarim Teruah Tikiyah, Rabbi Levi Yitzhak Berditchev is understanding what this means as God loves you, you love God. It breaks your will to do the evil inclination, and we return to God in love again, right? That is the secret meaning of those 4 notes, that by doing shofar, and perhaps by doing love for God and remembering that God loves you, you break your inclination to do evil, right? And I explained the Yetzer Hara, the inclination to do evil, as our desire to do laziness, complacency, and harshness. But there are a gazillion aspects to the Yetzer Hara, our inner inclination, right? We have active desire for lust, greed, sloth. We also have a active desire to be complacent, right? The desire to do evil can be the lack of desire to do anything, right? When I lie on my couch and say, I'll do it later, there's something good on Netflix right now. That might be me doing self-care and resting, which is very important, but it also might be at some point after hour 9 of me binge watching my favorite show, that might be complacency and laziness. So we serve God with truth and love, and it breaks our inclination to do evil. And that's the teaching of the shofar from the Kedushat Levi, right? That the shofar helps us to remember our love for God and our desire to break that inclination to do evil, which will make us our best selves. That's the 4th interpretation. And the 5th and final interpretation, which is perhaps my favorite. This one I just found a couple weeks ago in a commentary of a new book that I bought. It's not new, it didn't just come out. I just added it to my library. There's a rabbi whose name is the Shemishmuel. That's Rabbi Shmuel Bordenstein. He's a Sochachover Rebbe. His father was the first Sochachov Rebbe, Rabbi Avram Bornstein. And he is from the descendants of the school of the Kotzker Hasidim. So it's a branch of Hasidut that is intensely pietistic and also deeply believes that Hasidut is a meritocracy, right? You get to be the rabbi of your community because you're an exceptional rabbi, not because your father was an exceptional rabbi. He says, hypothetically, also pointing out that Shmuel Bordenstein's father was a rabbi. But anyways, okay. But he writes something very beautiful in his book, which is called the Shemishmuel. And it's a commentary on a very famous midrash that is about the shofar. And so you're kind of getting a twofer here, right? I brought you 7 texts, 2 from the Torah and 5 different commentaries on what is the spiritual meaning of the shofar. But we conclude with him doing another text, which he's going to comment further on. Okay. I'll read this one out loud. I'll give you my thoughts, and then I'll answer some of the questions from the chat. If you have more questions on the shofar, I'll do my best to answer them. Hopefully I know some. Additionally, this is being recorded, so you can recommend this if you like anything or if you want to go back and catch something that you missed. And lastly, I taught a version of this class almost identically last Wednesday and recorded it and put it on the bethshalompgh.org website. So if you can't find it on the giant Maiv Jewish Learning website, which has 4 gazillion resources and is fantastic, but it's sometimes hard to find stuff on, you can also go to bethshalompgh.org and find this as well. All right. Again, self-promotion. Okay, moving on. You have to blow your own shofar sometimes. That was terrible. This is the reason why keeping everyone on mute is good, because I can assume that none of you are laughing, and the silence I intuit as nothing more than the function of mute. All right. In the Midrash, all the days of the year the Jews toil at their work, and on Rosh Hashanah they take up their shofars and blow before the Holy One, blessed be. And God stands up, moving from the throne of judgment to the throne of mercy. And God's heart is inverted from Midat Hadin, the attribute of justice, to Midat HaRachamim, the attribute of mercy. This is a beautiful midrash, rabbinic story based on a verse in the Torah of one of the verses I mentioned before of Leviticus chapter 29. And what it's saying is this: God judges us all day long for 355 days a year. God sits in the throne of judgment. And everything we do, good or bad, God weighs on the scales and decides, maybe this person isn't such a good person, and maybe it's time to strike them from the book of life for the coming year, right? God is sitting enthroned in the seat of judgment 355 days a year. And according to the Midrash, according to this rabbinic text from probably around the 4th century, possibly earlier, 4th century Common Era, the shofar's purpose is that it makes God stand up and get off of the throne of justice and move to the throne of mercy, right? It's no joke, it's the musical chairs of the divine realm, right? We blow the shofar down on earth, and God goes, time for me to get up and move to the other chair. And then for the next 10 days, from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, God sits on the throne of mercy and remembers that God's creation, humankind, are flawed and imperfect and don't do their best all the time. But God created us in love and in rachamim, in mercy. And God is going to say, we all screwed up this past year, and we really, really want you to go forth into the world with a sense of mercy, with a sense of love. And so we're going to be forgiving. And so God forgives us over these 10 days. And only because we blew shofar did God move from the seat of justice to the seat of mercy. All right. With that, it ends the Midrash, and now we get the commentary of the Shemishmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel Bordenstein says the following: in humans, there are 2 forces. The first is among their available tools, and the second is higher than their tools. Okay? There's a thing that humans can do to affect the universe, and there's a thing that is beyond human capacity and yet also still affects the universe. You'll understand in a moment. Tefillah, prayer, is accomplished by way of speech. And this force, which is within their tools, is via tzimtzum, contraction, limitation. And thus it is incapable of acting to stir divine mercy, for justice is achieved via contraction. Okay, that's a little convoluted, but I'll explain it. Speech and prayer are our way of communicating with God, with the divine. And usually during the year, we communicate with the divine through prayer, and God is cool with that. But at high holidays, according to the Shemishmuel, tefillah doesn't really work the same way. If it works kind of at a lower order. And then he talks about this idea of tzimtzum, of contraction, right? Words are, by definition, defining elements, right? I want to say these words and not those words. I want to restrict what I'm talking about to shofar and not start talking about the scarves that are behind me or whatever else. Therefore, I am going to use my speech to delimit, to connote, and to direct the conversation, the understanding to the following things, right? Speech is finite, would be another way of saying that. And speech defines. Its purpose is to set boundaries and limits to things. And therefore, it is limited, right? Speech can only accomplish the words that come out of my mouth. I can't say everything. I can't pontificate on all the matters of Rosh Hashanah. I don't have time. And I have chosen not to do that because my Jewish learning said, we want you to teach on Shofar and not Rosh Hashanah. Great. That's great. I'm happy to. Obviously, we've got enough to talk about. He continues. So words come out when we pray, and words are finite. They're not infinite. However, the force that is higher than this tool of prayer, of speech, is expansive and not contraction. And one can stir rachamim by mercy by expansion and not by contraction. This force is available to humans in the innermost depths of the heart, but they cannot extricate it by way of speech. As it is written, their heart cried to Adonai. This means the heart itself cries to God, blessed be, that it is incapable of being expressed by the mouth, and this stirs a great mercy. And this is the voice of the innermost shofar, which cannot be accomplished by speech or prayer. And by this force, the shofar transforms the attribute of justice to mercy. And he ends in these very Hasidic words, Veda, and know this. Okay? So let me explain what just happened. The lower tools are prayer, right? Prayer are finite and limited. But there is a higher tool that human beings have, but they only have it at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the higher tool is the shofar. And the reason for that is this. Your heart calls out to God. And your heart, as it is expressed through your mouth, does the best it can to say the words to God at the high holidays that will get forgiveness, that will make God be merciful, that will move God from the seat of din, of justice, to the seat of rachamim, to the seat of mercy. But our words are only our words, right? Our rabbis composed good prayers, but they're not perfect. And they're mostly from the brain to the mouth and out to God. And hopefully they're good enough, but what if they're not, right? What if my heart is crying out to God and I don't adequately have the words to say that will connect my heart to the divine? You have another tool, right? Your heart cries out to God, according to the Torah, according to a verse that I think appears in Eicha, which is the book of Lamentations, interestingly. The heart cries out to God, and the way we express it is through your innermost shofar. The shofar is an instrument which transcends speech and prayer and goes directly between the blower, the community that is hearing the blowing, and God, right? It moves God because it is the truest expression of the Jewish people calling out to the Holy One, blessed be God. It moves God because it is deeper than speech itself. It is the higher tool that we are given. So to conclude that fifth kind of commentary by the Shemishmuel, his take is something that I think a lot of us really experience when we hear the shofar, which is the shofar is better than words, right? The shofar is transcendent and visceral. When we come to synagogue or when we go online to hear the shofar, we feel moved. And we don't exactly know why we're moved. And we know that all the words that Rabbi Goodman and all the other rabbis and all the other cantors and all the other spiritual leaders and all the other kohenets and marats that you're going to hear at the high holidays, they have written beautiful sermons. They have worked tirelessly for the last weeks and months to find the right words to tug at your heartstrings and make you feel something at these high holidays. But I know, I've been doing this for years, man. This is my 17th year of leading as a rabbi and probably my 23rd as a spiritual leader, right? Sometimes nothing is as good as the shofar. That sound will hit you right in the chest and it'll move you. It will bring up all sorts of feelings, some of which are based in memory, some of which transcend memory. And you don't even know why you're feeling it, but it makes you feel amazing. And so sometimes the shofar is beyond words, but it connects you and your love and your need for rachamim, for mercy, between you and the Holy One, blessed be God. All right, with that, I am done with the words of the words, right, of this shiur, and I'm going to crack open the chat and see what I find if there's anything. First question I see is there a link to the handout? No, there is not. If there is a way for My Jewish Learning to post this afterwards alongside the video, I'd be happy to do that.
Yes, absolutely. We can do that.
Great. Then I will send you a PDF of this and you can post it afterwards. All right, what else do I got? Peter Hampton, to a rabbi that rocks. Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Cantor Neil Schwartz says, I own a long ibex shofar, but when I used a kudu horn in the Boy Scouts during one of their ceremonies, it was black and a larger diameter. It did not sound the same as my ibex horn, not like any of my many ram's horns. Really interesting. I just wanted to note a thing that I learned just this past couple weeks in Jerusalem. I was in Jerusalem with my family for vacation. The Judaica store I went to had every possible type of horn. They had from the least expensive, smallest horns, all the way up to the most expensive horn. The most expensive horn was not the kudu horn. The kudu horn was roughly 600 shekel, which is like roughly $150. But the most beautiful horn that I saw was a really rough ram's horn that was really old and gnarled and beautiful and filled with knobs, right? Like really crusty and ginormous, like kind of like a Rocky Mountain goat, the kind that you see bashing their heads into one another. And the reason that those are nicer and better is that they're just really rare and hard to find. And that one ran 800 shekel, which makes it almost, I think, what did I say? That one's, to convert these days, is about $200, maybe a little bit more, with the like 230 with the conversion. This one I've had for over 20 years, and I'm afraid to buy anything better. So I'm true to my shofar. Okay. A shofar anecdote from Neil Schwartz also. I play taps on my trumpet for Memorial Day at my shul for Veterans Day. When I left one shul, I had already packed my trumpet before Memorial Day. I brought out my ibex horn to the cemetery and played taps. So Neil Schwartz can get more notes out of a shofar than I can. Like I said, I can only get 3. I'll tell you the story that I told our host Mara when we started, because it's funny and it actually relates to this whole class and the question of the notes you get out of the shofar. The beginning of Elul, I was teaching Rosh Hashanah to our class here in the Talmud. We have a Talmud class on Mondays at 9:15 here at Beth Shalom. Some people in the room, most people on Zoom. And we were learning about the shofar. And I said, hey, why don't I do a demonstration? So I grabbed the shofar and I blew it. And all the hands online went up and I was talking, as rabbis are wont to do. I continued to talk. And someone said, I said, oh, I see a lot of hands up in the Zoom chat. You know, what can I do? And I clicked on unmute and someone said, Rabbi, we didn't hear the shofar. I said, what? They said, yeah, we couldn't hear it. I said, but I blew it. And another student in the class, Olivia, said, I know what that is. The settings in Zoom will automatically block car horns and dog barks unless you change the settings from original sound off to original sound on. So I thought that that was an amazing Torah moment for all of us. And the reason that it's an amazing Torah moment is it's like a 6th interpretation, which is Zoom filters out the sound of the shofar. It begs the question in our own lives, what do we filter out of our own lives? What people do we filter out? What sounds do we filter out? Who is the annoying person in your office block who comes to you complaining and whining about the toner cartridge, or, the lack of benefits, or that we aren't getting off at 3:30 on Friday like we used to in the summer, right? Do you filter that person out? Do you completely tune them out, like Zoom tuned out our shofar? And maybe it's time to tune them in again, right? To listen to the things that you're supposed to listen to. So Jordan Walker brings in, what about the psalm that says, Tiku b'chodesh hashofar, right? That blow the shofar on the new moon. Bekesel leyom chagenu. I'm adding to it. Any tips or tricks for making the sound? So Jordan, I think, is commenting on the fact that I said, oh, the Torah only brings up these 3 references to shofar. And when I say the Torah, I meant the 5 books of Moses, which are the authoritative books from which we derive mitzvot. We almost never, although not completely never, derive mitzvot from the rest of the Nevi'im and Ketuvim. I can give you an example. very quickly, which is the commandment to light your Hanukkah candles is derived not from the Torah, the Chumash, because as we know, Hanukkah doesn't appear in the Chumash at all. We derive it from the book of Maccabees and from some other places throughout the Torah and the Talmud. So there are a few mitzvot that appear outside of the 5 books, but that's not really one of them. So the psalm that says blow the shofar at the new moon, the rabbis, I think, decided that just like the Jubilee year, we don't do it because the temple is no longer standing. And the blowing of shofar at the new moon was to signal to individuals that it is the new moon, and so to keep all of the Jewish people on the same consistent calendar. So my guess, I'm not entirely sure this is true, but my guess is that this is one of those mitzvot that dropped out after the destruction of the temple. When the third temple is built, b'mheira b'yameinu, soon in our days, it will become possible to blow the shofar at the new moon again. Question 2, any tips or tricks for making the sound? Just keep buzzing. You know, if you keep buzzing your lips, you'll eventually get a sound out of it. You get better at blowing shofar over time. My 10-year-old daughter blows shofar pretty well. My 12-year-old son, not so much. So I'm looking forward to one of them getting good enough at it so that I can bring them up to Erie where I lead services and having them blow shofar so that I don't have to do everything. That'll be fun. You mentioned the meaning of the word shivarim and truah. What is the Hebrew root and actual meaning of tikiyah? So the only places that I've found the word tikiyah and tokeah are to blast. But other than that, I would recommend going to Sefaria, which has a really nice function when you search words that'll allow you to access a concordance, also allow you to access both the Jastrow dictionary and I think the Brown Driver Briggs dictionary, which will allow you to look up all the possible mentions. The word truah, as I know it, means blast. Okay. What else we got? Link in the chat came in late. That's a link to where you could find a version of this video. I'll put it back in for everyone. For those who come in late, bestshalom.pgh.org. You'll go to the video section and it'll be there. Question, how do you know what shape you need? That is a great question. Shofarot have different mouth shapes. You basically adjust your lips for the shape of the shofar. When I rolled in to do Elul shofar blowing the first Thursday that I was on here at my synagogue, I brought my own shofar out of fear that I wouldn't be able to blow the ones that they had, but they had 3 different shofarot on the bima. And I pulled one out, and once I tweaked my lips a little bit from to I got a sound out of it, no problem. So if you can play with the mouth shape, it's not a problem. The other story I'll tell was, this is a funny one. When I first moved to Pittsburgh, all of our stuff, including my shofar, was in storage. And I got to my synagogue in Erie, and the only shofarot they had were in the glass case in the lobby. And they were basically like for display purposes only. And I turned to the president. I was like, hey, you're going to have to find the keys to the case because I don't have a shofar. And she found a couple, and I picked one, and I blew it. So, you know, if you tinker with it a little bit, you'll eventually find the right one. But you should be okay. You should be, if you can play around with it, you'll be all right. Does blowing the shofar fulfill my obligation of hearing the shofar? Chaya, that is a fantastic question. It comes right out of the Talmud. The Talmud says the same question, so brilliant question on your part. And the answer is, if you incline your brain to say, I am fulfilling the mitzvah for myself, then you do. If someone says, hey, Chaya, can you blow the shofar for me? And you say, sure. And you think to yourself, I'll blow shofar for myself later. There is a question in the Talmud as to whether, if you are not fulfilling the mitzvah for yourself, whether you have presence of mind to fulfill it for other people. And so the rabbis actually debate that, and it's unclear what the answer is, right? Ultimately, the shofar blower and the shofar hearer must have intent to fulfill the mitzvah, ideally, in order to fulfill it. This gets into one of the most debated sections in all of the Talmud, which is whether you can fulfill a commandment without really intending to fulfill a commandment, right? The example of this that Talmud Brachot brings up is if Ross, who's the third window on my Zoom, hi Ross, asks the question, hey Rabbi, what's the most important line in all of the Torah? And I say, what? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad? Question mark? The question is asked, did I fulfill the commandment of reciting Shema daily, or did I just ask Ross's question? And the rabbis debate that to this day, and there's no good clarification. Okay, Reuben asked a great question, which is really funny, which I like. Why is it so much easier to blow a shofar alone than in front of a crowd? I experienced this too. I refer to it as stage fright, right? When you are in really stressful circumstances, it becomes difficult, I think, because your jaw tightens up and your lips tighten up, and it gets harder to blow shofar. As a rabbi, shofar stage fright is real, and I get nervous about it every year, which is why I practice a little bit during the rest of the year. I've pretty much transcended it, though, and gotten pretty decent at it, so no longer really much of a problem. Okay. Erica, who is one of my students here in Pittsburgh, I purchased one and was able to try out a few in the store. I chose the one I was able to get a sound out of most easily. It wasn't the prettiest one, but at least it was less expensive than the others. Yeah, that's great. The other thing is, as I mentioned at the beginning, the umbrature, the mouthpiece at the front, the rounder it is my experience, it's the easier to blow. Some are more oval shaped. And some, the cheapest one that you just get at a slaughterhouse that has not been modified at all, will just be square. And the only way I can get a sound out of a square one is if I block all of my mouth and fit like the side lips of my lips, upper and lower, into the crevices. Sometimes you have to stick your lips into a shofar to get a sound out of it. The last thing I'll say as we're expiring, before I say something spiritual to end, is that the kudu horn, which is longer, makes a beautiful sound. It's much more resonant, but it doesn't make a bigger sound, right? It's harder to get louder sounds out of larger shofarot, which is sort of counterintuitive for some of us, but what really is happening there is you're pushing more oxygen, more wind through more of the thing, and more of it's vibrating, and the greater the amount of vibration, the more it kind of gives a nice mellow tune, but not a louder tune, just a more vibrant tune. So I find smaller shofars are louder and bigger shofars are quieter in my experience. Okay, that's all the time I have for questions. May you go out and find great meaning in the shofar itself. Be present, be penitent, let it break your broken heart and bring you back to wholeness again. And may it be your will, O God, that all of us hear the shofar in such a way that God is moved towards love for us as individuals and for the Jewish people and for the entire universe together. Amen, Selah. May you all have a blessed and sweet new year. Shana Tova Umetuka.